Thank you so much. And thank you to the attendees and the people that have already submitted questions to us. Hopefully, we're going to get to all of your stuff. If you have other questions, please add them and we'll make sure we cover them. And today, it's my privilege to introduce somebody to you who I get to call friend outside of the CEO coaching world, who's a phenomenal dad, a great husband, and a really good person. But for today, you're going to find out that he's an amazing lawyer. So, Hillel, you have a unique specialty. Why don't you talk to us about asset protection and how you got there? Give us just a quick, quick tour through your bio, and then we'll get into it.
Sure. So as far back as I can remember, if you would have asked me when I was 8 years old what I was going to be, I would have told you hands down that I was going to be an attorney. And it probably had something to do with the fact that back then I was very close with my uncle Jimmy, and I grew up in upstate New York in Rochester. And while I knew him as Uncle Jimmy, the rest of the world knew him as Jim the Hammer Shapiro. And Jimmy used to get on TV and scream at the top of his lungs, Jim the Hammer Shapiro, I'll rin out every penny, squeeze out every dime. You don't have to like me, just make sure you call me. I may be an SOB, but I'm your SOB. And I don't say that because I'm proud of Jimmy, but Jimmy was one of the first personal injury attorneys to ever advertise on TV. And growing up, I had this just love and passion for both law and business. And there were literally thousands of lawyers in every city trying to find a way, just like Uncle Jimmy did, to take your money. I thought it would be pretty neat to be one of only few attorneys in the entire country to teach people how to protect it. So I became an asset protection attorney, and I joke that I am the lawyer that hates lawyers.
So that's terrific and it's interesting. So let's start off with asset protection. As you know, before we met, I had trusts, corporations, insurance, and you said to me, Lou, I like you, and you're really not protected. So why do trusts, corporations, insurance not protect us? What really is the ecosystem of asset protection?
Sure. So let me break down each one of those, starting with trusts. First of all, trusts are probably one of the biggest misconceptions that I see on a daily basis in my office. Somebody walks into my office, they have a trust, and they think they're protected. Unfortunately, the majority of trusts, revocable trusts, living trusts, don't give you any asset protection at all. So a trust is a great tool to have. However, it's an estate planning tool for when you die, which helps you avoid probate. It doesn't give you any asset protection at all while you're alive. So if you have a revocable living trust, which when someone walks into my office, that's probably what 9 out of 10 people tend to have, you literally have 0% asset protection while you're alive. In regards to corporations, people always think that if they have a corporation, they're protected, and they are half right. I always tell my clients, you always need to look both inside out and outside in. So what does a corporation do? Well, a corporation protects you personally and your personal assets from any business debts and liabilities. So if you have a dog walking company and you have that company under your own name, if the dog bites someone, they can sue you personally. That's why most people create a company. They create a corporation, an LLC, and that way with their dog walking business, if the dog bites someone, they don't get sued personally, the business gets sued, which protects their personal assets. However, here's the problem. People never think about it the other way around. What if you're sued personally and not in business? Maybe you have a teenage driver that's driving your car and they get in an accident and you get sued because you're the owner. What if you're sued because someone gets injured on one of your properties? If you get sued and you own ownership interest in a corporation, maybe shares in an S Corp or shares in a C Corp, you can lose those shares and thus lose the entire business. So when it comes to corporations, you need to make sure that both the shares in the corporations are protected in case you get sued personally. And of course, you need to make sure that you have a corporation or some sort of business entity set up so you're not sued personally for business debts and liabilities. And lastly, in regards to insurance, and let me just kind of start by saying, I love insurance. I tell my clients to buy as much as they can because it's cheap and it helps you sleep at night. But understand, anybody who's ever read their insurance policy knows there's about a half a page of what's covered and about 40 pages of exclusions. I remember my dad would always tell me growing up, he'd say, son, the big print giveth, the small print taketh away. And even myself, I had a rental property. Someone claimed that they got sick from mold in the property. To my knowledge, I thought I had a $10 million policy, which I did. However, what I didn't understand is that on page 24 in 4-point font, mold was only covered up to $5,000 to $10,000. So if I was sued for $1 million, I would have to come out of pocket the rest. So insurance is always a good first line of defense, but you don't want to solely rely on it. You want to have your own asset protection plan to supplement your insurance. I call it belt and suspenders.
So a minute ago, you mentioned your uncle, and everybody on the planet hates lawyers, and even you hate lawyers. And it's funny, I think you actually have a video about your uncle because this sets the tone of what most of us should be scared of. So Nylene, I think you have a video you can share with us.
Absolutely.
I cannot rip out the hearts of those who hurt you. I cannot hand you their severed heads. But I can hunt them down and settle the score. I'll squeeze them for every dime I can. Every single dime. I'm Jim the Hammer Shapiro. But I cannot proceed until you call. 1-800-546-7777. You call, I hammer.
And Lou, I'll tell you the interesting thing about this video. We don't have time, otherwise I'd show you my favorite video where his face pops out of the zero of the 1-800 number. But this was 30 or 40 years ago in upstate New York. Today, every billboard, every radio station, every TV station, every bus bench, who can I sue? How do I take the money out of the hardworking individuals, redistribute the wealth, and of course take about a third or 40% for the lawyers themselves?
Yeah, we all hate that, don't we? But so you talked to us about why trusts and corporations insurance protect some stuff, but not everything. What really is asset protection for that other bucket that's not covered in the fine print, as you would say?
Sure. So really the boring legal definition of asset protection is really, legally shielding all of your assets to make them uncollectible and judgment proof. So what we do as asset protection attorneys is we want to make it so difficult, so expensive, if not impossible, for anybody to collect against you that either A, they don't want to sue you in the first place, and B, if they do sue you, we want you to be able to settle your case for 5 or 10 or 15 cents on the dollar. So really, everyone's worked hard their entire life to grow their assets and accumulate assets, but unfortunately, people never think about protecting it. And one lawsuit can take away a lifetime's of work, and unfortunately, we live in a very frivolous society.
That is so true. So basically, you're talking about what some people call the porcupine defense. You just make somebody really hard to swallow. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. We don't want our clients to be the low-hanging fruit. Go somewhere else. And if you do decide to sue them, again, we've settled $20 million lawsuits for $250,000, $5 million judgments for $500,000. So we don't want our clients to be exposed.
And it's interesting because even though the title of our event today is, for CEOs, we're only us, those of us that have been CEOs, you're only CEOs some of the day, you're just a person the rest of the day. What's the difference between asset protection for the business versus asset protection for the person?
Sure. Well, first, I think it's interesting to understand, and when people hear these stats, they tend to go crazy. You are 7 times more likely to be sued than get in a car accident. So if that doesn't scare you, I mean, it certainly scares me. Personal asset protection deals with how do we protect personal assets? So how do we protect real estate, your primary home, your vacation home, your rental property? How do we protect liquid assets like checking, savings, stocks, bonds, CDs, money markets, brokerage accounts? How do we protect retirement accounts? How do we protect toys like boats, planes, golf carts, jet skis, even items like inheritances? So those are all personal assets. Also, if you own ownership interest in a company, maybe you own 5% of a C Corp, or maybe you own 85% of an LLC, that's also a personal asset, the ownership in the business. So you want to make sure that all personal assets are always protected. That's in case you get sued personally. On the business side, you want to make sure that all of the business assets are sued. So for example, if you're a builder, you may have millions of dollars of machinery or equipment, or you might have millions of dollars of liquid assets in the business because you need it for bonding purposes. So we want to make sure that if the business is sued, all the business assets are protected. And it's not just the machinery and the equipment, it's not just the liquid assets. What about accounts receivables? What about intellectual property like patents and trademarks and phone numbers and domains? Those are all assets of value that if you were sued, you can lose. And if your phone number ran to the competitor, pretty big asset.
So I'm still a little confused. And actually, I'm really not confused, but some of the people that are listening to us are a little confused. Asset protection is this big bucket, and you talked about, we know the belt is the insurance and the trusts and the corporations, and you're the suspenders. What is it? Just give us a high level of what is it that you do for people like me?
Sure. So to keep it really simple and oversimplify things, we retitle your assets so no one can take them. So if you have money in your checking account or your trust checking account and you get sued, you can lose all of that money. If you have real estate in your name or your trust name, if you get sued, you can lose that real estate. So to oversimplify things, what we do is we go in, we look at all the assets and we retitle things. So the money we take out of the person's name where they can lose it all, and we may put it in some sort of protective entity, maybe a limited partnership, for example. We look at the real estate, we may take it out of somebody's name and put it into a protective entity, maybe an LLC, for an example. So by retitling the assets, you can protect it. And the key really with asset protection is own nothing, control everything. Own nothing, control everything. If you own something, it is yours to lose if you get sued. But if instead you can retitle it and merely control it, nobody can take it. However, you enjoy the benefit, the use, and you don't lose any control over the asset.
Okay, but life is complicated enough. And now you're saying I control things, but I don't own things, but I have money in my checking account because I've got to pay my taxes. I've got to pay if I go to the doctor. I've got to pay gasoline. How do I get my own money if you're putting it in somebody else's name?
Sure, and it never goes in someone else's name. It goes into an entity name. And you'd still keep your personal bank account. So Lou, let's say you had $1 million in stocks and bonds. What we would do with you is we would make sure that you keep a personal checking account. Depending on how much you spend, you may keep 20, 30, 40, $50,000 in that personal checking account. That way you have easy access at any time to pay any bills like mortgage, electricity, food, anything like that. And then we would take any big monies or big savings or investments, we'll call it the other 950 on the $1 million example, and we may title those stocks and bonds to a limited partnership. Now, it's left pocket, right pocket. You can always put more money in the limited partnership. You can always take money from the limited partnership and put more money in your personal account. You would very simply have an account for each, the personal account, and in this example, the limited partnership account at the same bank. And in 5 to 10 seconds, you can do an online transfer from one account to the other. It's totally tax neutral, and you always have total access to your money. But you would never want to leave more in your personal account that you're willing to risk and lose.
And the first time we talked about this, it sounded so complicated, and well, if I have it in one of these other entities that I'm the owner of and I'm taking it back to me, everybody's going to see that. They're going to see right through it. And you said that is so not true. But that's just one misconception. You talk to lots of clients. What are the misconceptions people have about asset protection? And it's how complicated it is. Because when you first hear about it, it sounds scary, but it's actually incredibly simple.
Sure. So a lot of misconceptions. In fact, some of the biggest misconceptions are what we talked about earlier. People think that a trust will protect them, which normally it won't. People think that the corporation will protect them, which normally it won't. People think that the insurance will protect them, which normally it won't. But other misconceptions are things like what you mentioned, privacy. So I always tell clients, we always want to be as private as possible. We always want to be as anonymous as possible, of course, to the extent that we can legally and ethically do so. But with that being said, asset protection is not about hiding, it's not about secrecy, it's about protection. And I tell every client that presume at some point you're going to disclose what you have to the other side. Because if somebody sues you and they beat you and they get a judgment against you, they'll ask you for a financial affidavit or a deposition under oath, and they'll ask you what you have, and you absolutely cannot lie. As you know, the cover-up's worse than the crime. So asset protection doesn't deal with hiding, it doesn't deal with secrecy, it deals with protection. So you should be able to tell everybody what you have and where it is. They just shouldn't be able to get to it. And in fact, we use that strategy a lot up front. Sometimes someone will threaten to sue one of my clients. We literally will get the file, copy it, and FedEx it to the lawyer, of course, with a copy of one of my books. We'll show them everything the client has and where it is, and just the fact that they can't get to it.
So we're talking at a really high level. What kind of strategies, like, is it a one size fits all? How do you treat me different than somebody with a higher net worth than me, or somebody with a lower net worth than me, or someone that really doesn't have significant assets, but it's even scarier for them to lose the small amount that they might have?
Absolutely. So we have a range of clients, and in my mind, everyone deserves help, and no one's too small and no one's too big. The example I always give is we've represented probably 40 NFL and NBA players. And take a football player who signs a $40 million contract. Well, if he gets sued for $40 million, excuse me, for $5 million, he's not happy, but he still has $35 million left. So he's not happy, but he's going to be okay. Contrast that with maybe a school teacher who saved up a couple $100,000 over their entire career. Well, if they get sued for $1 million, it's catastrophic. They're totally wiped out. So I could argue that the person who has less money actually needs asset protection more than the person who has more money. Now, obviously, we're not going to use the same tools. Somebody may be protecting against a second or third or fourth marriage, others because they just sold a business, others from a teenage driver, and others for a wide variety of reasons. So everybody's personal assets are different. Everybody's personal and business potential threats and creditors and liabilities are different. So what you want to do is you want to have an individualized and customized and tailored plan that fits that particular specific client's needs, because what I would set up for you may be far different than what I set up for someone else.
So can you give us some specifics? Maybe even a case study. So one on its pure personal and one that's corporate slash personal. What would that look like? Because I'm afraid people are hearing this sounds really complex, and I want them to see your side of what gets done as complex. But for your clients, it's incredibly simple.
Yeah, it's kind of like going into surgery. I mean, you don't need to know how to perform the surgery. You want to know that you have the best surgeon, that this is what they do all day. You want to know what you have to prepare for the surgery, how long it will take, and what the recovery time is. At the end of the day, you just want the cake. We don't need to know how to bake the cake. And no different here. In fact, asset protection actually simplifies people's lives. And I'll give you an example. Somebody walks in with 6 pieces of real estate, and some are his primary, some are his vacation home, some are rental properties, and everything's in their name. Well, the money's going in his personal account for rent, the money's going out of his personal account for electricity, for mortgage. Well, you can expense things for rental properties that you can't expense for your primary home. If that individual in that case had different entities, maybe they had a few different LLCs set up for the different properties, it would really simplify their life, because the rent for property number 1 goes in LLC number 1, and any expenses like the electric or the mortgage, et cetera, for property number one come out of property number one. So although it sounds confusing, it actually, once you have it implemented, actually simplifies your life. And I could tell you story and story where asset protections really help people. A few that come to mind. Number one, there was a big real estate investor, and he was buying up, pretty much any piece of real estate he could buy, office, residential, commercial, strip centers, and then the market took a turn. Well, he had personally guaranteed everything. So there was all sorts of short sale and foreclosure deficiencies and judgments against him. He ended up with a $5 million judgment because he had proactively put his asset protection plan in place. We were able to go to the lenders and show that they weren't able to get that $5 million, and we settled that case for $500,000. So if he hadn't done that, he would have lost another $4.5 million. From a business perspective, I remember a gentleman, he sold his business for about 10 or $15 million. And it's crazy. People think when they sell their business, they're off the hook. In fact, the biggest lawsuit we ever see is when someone sells their business. If you look at the stats, 74% of business sales transactions either fail to transact or face litigation within 10 years, and 55% of sales essentially lose at least 40% of gross revenues with ownership transition. And think about it, it makes sense, right? Nobody's ever going to run the company like you. You leave the company, that is your baby, income goes down, expenses go up. So what I see is a year or two later, the buyer who can't run the business as well as you sues for fraud. I call it renegotiation. So the minute I have a client that sells their business, I tell them immediately, take your chips off the table. And in this example, my client sold their business for $10 to $15 million. Okay. About a year or two later, the buyer ran it to the ground. They sued my client. My client was uncollectible and judgment proof. My client ended up buying the business back for $2 to $3 million, no money down, no personal guarantee. So he sold it for 10 to 15, bought it back for zero down for 2 to 3 million, and he's built it up tenfold since then. Without the asset protection, all the proceeds from the sale could have been clawed back.
Interesting. And in that, these examples, so when I sold my companies, there were a gazillion lawyers and investment bankers, and then I had the wealth management guys coming in and saying, what are you going to do with your capital? And I had the tax guy saying how to be tax efficient. And there are all of these people. And then I bring Hillel into the mix. Talk about the actual ecosystem of all of the various advisors. And are you the quarterback? How do you fit in with all of that?
Sure. So look, we don't necessarily need to be the quarterback. I tell the client, appoint whoever you want to be the quarterback, but there needs to be a quarterback. And I call him the financial quarterback. One of the biggest things I see is that nobody's team is talking. So, what good is it if you protect your assets, if when you die, the assets don't go where you want them to go? Or what good is it if you do your estate planning and the assets go where you want them to go, but half of it goes to the government and taxes? So you need to have a financial quarterback to bring your team together. And whenever I'm working with a client, my focus is always, while you're alive, do the asset protection, make them uncollectible and judgment proof so they never need to start over. However, make sure at the end of the day, they end up with an integrated plan so when they do pass away, the assets go where they want them to go, quickly, privately, less taxes, less lawyer fees. And we actually have a whole trusted advisors department at our firm that works with the client's financial advisor, banker, CPA, et cetera, to make sure everyone's on the same team and everybody understands everything. And most importantly, that the client has one cohesive, comprehensive, integrated plan.
And I'm sure a lot of the people on this webinar today, they've asked their trust advisor or their wealth manager, am I protected? And they heard the following answer, absolutely. And yet, every time we laugh at that story, you say, absolutely not. What are the 2 or 3 questions somebody should ask the person that's protecting them today to find out if they're really protected?
Milk and then make.
First of all, I always give a joke, which is I always tell them to ask their attorney or their advisor, hey, if I'm protected, would you mind giving me a letter on your letterhead and the firm's letterhead stating that, and that if I'm not protected, you'll cover it? It's always quick for an advisor to tell you you're covered, but obviously they never want to put that in writing. But what you need to ask the advisors are, how am I protected? If the assets are titled to me, if the assets are titled to my trust, how am I protected? Most of the time, they say insurance is enough, which obviously it's not.
He's taught me.
And to that end, specifically, what insurances, again, you talk about the small print, the fine print. When I talk to my insurance guy, what do I ask him to better, or her to better understand? Am I properly protected? Or what do I ask them to talk to a guy like you? What's the first question they should be asking?
Yeah, I always like to ask the insurance agents what's not protected. And to be honest with you, I always like to have, somebody like an attorney review the insurance policy. That way you get a independent set of eyes.
Yeah,
But
very nice.
if somebody's not asset protected, asset protection focused, will that attorney even know the right stuff? Because you're, as you said, you're in this small group, this niche of people that really understand to protect assets. The typical lawyer may look at it, will they even know what they're looking at to make sure you're protected?
Probably not, and that may be okay, but they need to know what they don't know. So hopefully they'll be honest and tell you, hey, look, this is not my area of specialties. However, let me get you to somebody who can do that.
So I think that's such a valid point, because again, as coaches, one of the things we're always working on is asking better questions, asking deeper questions, probing a little bit more. So to the people on this that are listening today, that's a really interesting tool that you're now giving them, is help ask your financial advisor, your insurance guy, your attorney, am I protected, and are you sure, and where does that come from, and what should I be looking at, and have you ever used someone outside as asset protection? Because if you haven't, they may not fully understand it. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
So changing a question a little bit, because a lot of the people that are listening to this call today don't just have domestic assets, they have international assets. How does that change how you approach somebody? How does that change what you can do for somebody?
Sure. So international comes into play twice. One, if they have international assets, and two, they may have US assets but just want international protection. If they have international assets, people think, oh, I have money in Zurich or Switzerland, or I have a house in France, and I'm just making that up. They feel like because it's outside of the United States, they're protected. And it's absolutely false. If you get sued and you get a judgment against you and you have $1 million in a Swiss account, or a $2 million beautiful condo in Paris, the US judge can order you immediately and threaten you with contempt of court to bring that money back or sell the condo in Paris and pay the creditor. So just because you have assets outside of the United States does not mean that they're safe. They still need to be protected. On the other hand, international asset protection also can really help you. So a lot of people with US assets will set up international components. And if done properly and if done proactively, then a US court may not have jurisdiction over those entities set up internationally or over the assets set up internationally. So just like in the US, it all comes down to titling. It's not good enough to have the assets outside of the United States. It's how are they titled outside of the United States? And again, anything titled to your name, even outside of the United States, you can lose. But if you create a protective entity outside the United States, you can protect it.
And you're a member of the Florida bar. I guarantee you somebody's going to have an attorney in a different state who's a member of that bar, and they say, oh, he's in Florida, he can't help you.
We actually have a nationwide practice, so we have clients in almost every single state and different countries as well. We do both fully domestic and international asset protection. In fact, I helped rewrite some of the international asset protection laws, and we have attorneys licensed in different states as well.
Awesome. So what's it like working with you? Because, and what I mean by that is workflow. So what is from the, I'm wondering, am I protected? From that first moment in time, what's the process of they call you all the way through, they have a full package and all of their other advisors are on board?
Sure. Well, first of all, if anyone comes through CEO coaching, I, of course, handle that case myself. I don't pass it on to another attorney. But what I always like to do is assess the situation first. So I'll start with just a complimentary preliminary consultation. I want to know what the client's goals and objectives are, what assets they have, if they've done any prior planning and things of that nature. And then depending on what they've done or not done in the past, we'll normally break up the engagement into two different stages. And stage number one, I call the planning or consulting or architecture. And stage number two, I call the building and the implementation. So if you think about it, if you wanted to go and build your dream house, you don't go out and just hire the builder. First thing you do is you hire the architect, and no difference here. Stage one, the client would retain us to essentially be their financial architect. Once we go through all of that, they can decide what they want to do and what they don't want to do, and we can move to the building and the implementation. But first, just assess what's going on, what are their goals and objectives, can we help them? After that, put a financial architecture in place, and after that, build and implement as little or as much as the client would like.
Okay, so I want to even dive a little deeper into that. If I were to come to talk to you, what should be in my file folder? How do I even tell you what I have? What would you tell somebody to bring to that meeting to inform you so you can help them?
Sure. So it depends how complex a case is. Obviously, the more information, the better. But really, that first meeting, I'm just trying to get the 30,000-foot overview. So how much real estate do you have? What's it worth? What's the mortgage? Do you have 5 properties? Do you have 50 properties? We don't necessarily need to break down one. How much do you have in liquid assets? How much do you have in retirement? What business ownership interests do you own? What are they worth? What kind of numbers are the businesses doing? So again, the more information you have, of course, the better job we can do. I always say I don't want to be the doctor that prescribes the medicine, knowing all the symptoms. However, really, we just want to get a 30,000-foot overview of what your personal and business assets are.
In an asset class that's been on the rise in the last few years, it's really complicated from do they exist or don't they exist, or these digital assets, whether it be cryptocurrency, NFTs, where do they fit into? Can you even protect something that lives on a hard drive or lives on a thumb drive that nobody actually knows exists?
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, again, if you get sued and you lose, they could sit you down for a deposition under oath and they could say, do you have any Bitcoin? Now, that may be on a thumb drive, but if you say no, and there's $10 million worth of Bitcoin, well, if it's not yours, I guess anybody can have it. And if it is yours, you've just lied and you may end up in jail for contempt. So it doesn't matter if the end asset is tangible or intangible, if it's physical or digital, you always need to make sure that it's properly titled and protected. So we protect people's crypto assets all the time, NFTs and things of that nature.
Okay. And the perfect example, NFTs are a relatively new concept. If somebody sets up their trusts years ago or their asset protection years ago, what's the process? How often should that be reviewed? Do the laws change often, or do your strategies change often?
Yeah, so thankfully, asset protection isn't changing daily. If you want to be super safe, I think once a year, just like you go for an annual physical, you can go for a financial physical. Certainly also if there's been big changes in your life, maybe there's been a divorce, maybe there's been a death, maybe there's been an inheritance, maybe there's been a business sale. So obviously, if big changes in your life, you always want to take a look at it. But absent that, maybe once every year or two. Also, we see a lot of people, I'm based out of Florida today, and we see a lot of people moving here. They might have moved here from California or New York. Well, someone might have had great documents for California, or someone might have had great documents for New York. But if they're now a Florida resident, they need to make sure that they have the proper documentation for Florida.
So this impacts state to state?
It does, and more so when you talk about estate planning versus asset protection. But yes, so for example, in Florida, your house is protected. You can have a $5 million house, you can have a $50 million house, and nobody can take it in a lawsuit. In New York or California, that's not the case. So I may advise a client in Florida to buy the biggest house they can afford and pay off the mortgage, while I may advise someone in California and New York either not to buy the biggest house they can afford or keep a big mortgage on it. So different states equals different planning.
Interesting. And the only thing that scares me more than a lawyer is an IRS agent. How does asset protection weave in with tax law, and if you're getting chased? Can you stand between me and the IRS, or is that a no-no?
Sure. So two points. Number one is the majority of what we do is tax neutral. So what that means is you will not pay more in taxes, you will not pay less in taxes. Now, with that being said, of course, you can do things like gifting and getting things out of your estate, which would be some tax planning. But normally, and I say normally, 80–90% of the time, there's no real tax disadvantages. And if anything, there's estate tax advantages. In regards to the IRS or protecting from the IRS, they are a super creditor. And what that means is they do have access to some assets that other creditors don't. So like we talked about in Florida, how your house may be protected. Well, there's three people that your house is not protected against. Number one, if you have a mortgage on your house, obviously the lender can foreclose. Number two, if somebody does work on your house, like puts a new roof on, and you don't pay them, they can take your house. And number three is the IRS. If you don't pay your taxes, they can go after your home. So there are some things where the IRS becomes a super creditor, but the majority of things, the IRS is just a normal creditor. Now, what does that mean? That means that they don't have any rights more than a normal creditor, absent the super creditor things that we just spoke about. However, understand there's a big difference, because when your neighbor's suing you and he spends $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, he feels that in his pocket. The IRS has unlimited resources to keep coming after you, coming after you, coming after you. So it's not that there's any special laws that they can break through the structure, but they can keep going and going while maybe others would feel the pain.
Cool. I am sure there's a gazillion questions that I haven't asked you to help the potential clients or even friends of people listening to this. What questions should I have asked you? What haven't we covered in the last 45 minutes that we should really talk about?
No, I think you did a really great job. I mean, I think the most important thing is, number one, just knowing that it exists. Unfortunately, like I said, there's only 5 or 10 real asset protection attorneys in the country that get the majority of the business. So unfortunately, a lot of people don't know about asset protection until it's too late. So I think the number one thing is just knowing that it's out there and knowing that there is a way to protect yourself. And again, people are so worried about growth. And believe me, we all like to make money, but there's only one thing worse than not making money, and that's losing money. So what I tell my clients is essentially, for every 60 minutes you spend making money, just stop and spend 60 seconds thinking about how to protect it. That way you never need to start over.
I love that. That's such a great concept. If people want to learn more, and I want to separate this into 2 questions. If people want to learn more about asset protection in general, where do you suggest they go to learn that? Now, I know you have one of the best-selling books on the topic, but are there websites? How do people go and learn? What were the questions? What's a question somebody might ask ChatGPT? Because now
Yeah.
we're all using that.
Yeah, so again, be careful with the answers that we get, but ask ChatGPT what asset protection is, why you need it, why liability insurance isn't enough. Hey, what should I do if I have these assets? Again, be careful with the answers. We don't want to be the lawyer who gets to court using ChatGPT and the case doesn't exist. But we have a very, very educational website. Our domain is www.assetprotectionattorneys.com. We have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of educational information. And if anybody contacts us, as long as they mention CEO coaching, I'm happy to send them complimentary copies of my latest books if they want to get more educated on the topic.
And again, you've taken care of my clients, me, my fellow coaches. So I know how great you are. I know that my people rave about you. So without sounding too self-promotional, let's in closing, I know why people rave about you. Why do you think people rave about you, and why should they be coming to you?
Sure. Well, first of all, we care. So we're here to help people and we're here to do the right thing. I have clients every single day that I tell them. In fact, I had someone yesterday who spoke to 3 other asset protection attorneys or planners. They all were trying to sell them something. And I was the first one who told them, you don't need anything. There's a few small steps you should take, but you really don't need anything. So really just to have that trustworthy person. Asset protection's not for everyone. Look, if we can help you, we're happy to help you, but we'll never do anything for someone that doesn't need it. And, to set us apart, we do a lot of different things. So, we do the asset protection, but some people only do domestic. Some people only do international. We do both domestic asset protection and international asset protection. Some people only do asset protection. We have estate planning attorneys, tax specialists, business succession planning specialists, not because we're trying to do those other areas of work, but we want to make sure that the client has one comprehensive plan and we can speak to their trusted advisors. So we go so far above and beyond just putting an asset protection plan together. I say it and it sounds corny, but our clients end up being our friends. We do everything we can to go above and beyond and help them.
And I know this to be true because I even had dinner with you last night. So I think that comes to the end of our conversation. And I just want to say, on behalf of the firm, thank you for being one of our sponsors. Thank you for being so good to all of our clients. And personally, thank you for being so good to me. So with that, thank you very much. And that brings our webinar today to an end. Nylene, I kick it back to you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you appreciated the value and the content shared. Thank you, Hillel. Thank you, Lou. Tremendous conversation. Wishing everybody a wonderful day.